In his work Poetics, Aristotle identifies 6 elements to every tragedy: plot, character, thought, diction, and lastly, Aristotle identifies song and spectacle. These are embellishments, however, and connect the least with the art of poetry. So if you're a fan of Aristotle, you might want to click off this video now, because today we are going to be discussing the most song-filled and spectacular of mediums: musicals. Well, musical television, that is. When I'm talking about musical television or the television musical, I'm not talking about filmed theater performances like PBS's Great Performances or television movies which feature musical numbers like High School Musical, although I will talk a little bit about High School Musical. In nature, those tend to lean more towards musical theater that just so happens to be on your television. I'm also not talking about television shows which are otherwise non-musical, save for a bottle episode which features the occasional song and dance. Sorry Riverdale, and sorry Buffy the Vampire Slayer. No, what I'm talking about here is the serialized musical television show. I'm talking about your Gallimans, your Smashes, your... Oh no. Glee. So yes, I'm watching Glee in quarantine. What of it? No, I was not a Glee. Yes. This is a video essay for me to talk about Glee. I'm interested in looking at Glee and musical television shows similar to Glee and how they use the musical number as a diegetic element. I keep throwing around the word diegetic. Glee. Diegesis is a style of storytelling in which the story is told rather than shown. Now obviously television is more mimetic in style or visual, but when we're talking about diegetic in cinema or film studies, diegesis relates to sound. Film sound for a long time has been classified as either diegetic or non-diegetic. Diegetic sounds are those sounds which exist within the film's universe, those which are understood by the characters as real. So for instance, dialogue, sound effects, or music which is playing in-world. In the world of this video, me talking is diegetic sound. Non-diegetic sound is the opposite of this, existing outside of the film's world. So any
musical scores or voiceover, such as the one I'm recording right now.
Thanks, voiceover. TV started around the same time that Hollywood was having a golden age, and the center of the golden age was the film musical. Classic film musicals like Singing in the Rain were noted for their high production value and need for suspended disbelief, a heightened sense of disbelief which was made possible through the venue which these films were exhibited in. Theaters similar to those that you would go into to see a Broadway show. Peak cinema. TV, however, was simple and much less cinematic. The magic of the television was that it was within the comfort of your own home and therefore grounded in more realism in that sense. Musicals, for this reason, failed to transition to television the way that other genres were eventually able to. Now, given the similar star power that both television and film industries had at the time, there was a little bit of crossover. In the 1950s, you did have shows like I Love Lucy and The Dick Van Dyke Show, which did to a degree feature music, but the music did very little for the plot of the show, and it didn't really progress the narrative forward, and was always explained by the reality of the show. Very diegetic. They said more about the culture which the shows were produced in rather than the narrative which the show was trying to present. The 1990s does see, however, 2 examples of originally scored musical television shows: Whole High and Cop Rock.
Hit.
Which failed miserably. In the early 2000s, we see the arrival of the musical bottle episode. Buffy the Vampire Slayer actually does feature some great performances which do carry some narrative weight to them. It builds on the plot prior to the episode and does leave some aftermath to be addressed in succeeding episodes. But there is an explanation in world for why it is that they're singing. Enter Kenny Ortega.
Glee.
In January 2006, High School Musical, a musical television movie, premiered on the Disney Channel. Now, I said I wasn't going to talk about television movies in this video, but I do think that it's important that we address High School Musical for what it was and what it meant for future musical projects on television. And you can't give Glee all the credit for what High School Musical broke the ground for. High School Musical, to a degree, follows the logic that's been set as a precedent thus far in that musical numbers are explained in world. However, there are also some non-diegetic numbers, which I find particularly interesting. But they're not even necessarily like non-diegetic because they exist within the world. The characters are singing, but do they know they're singing? Claudia Gordman, in her work Unheard Melodies, Narrative Film Music, addresses a third area which I want to touch on, which is the metadiegetic. Metadiegetic sounds are those which are imagined or hallucinated by those in world. It's dependent on the character's perception of reality. High School Musical is this interesting amalgamation of diegetic performances and metadiegetic performances. There are the performances which in world make sense as, musical numbers that are being performed as musical numbers. There are the metadiegetic examples of get your head in the game or stick to the status quo.
Then I can tell mine. I bake. What? I love to bake. Strudel, scones, even apple pandowdy.
Which I don't think that the characters know that they're singing, but I think that they're singing what they're feeling. So for that reason, I'm going to classify it as subjective. And High School Musical was a smash hit. 3 years later, in 2009, the pilot episode of Glee premieres on Fox. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Glee just outright copied and pasted High School Musical's formula and tropes and made them edgy, because that's really not what happened. Glee faces some challenges that High School Musical did not have to face. For one, there's the longevity of your suspension of disbelief when you're watching a musical television show versus a television movie. If you're watching High School Musical, you only have to believe that these teenagers are performing these song and dance numbers to reflect their feelings for 90 minutes. With Glee, you have to do it for 22 hours. A season. And secondly, there was the audience. Glee's time slot made it much more accessible to the 18 to 40 demographic as opposed to Disney Channel's market, which is children. Children are much more willing to listen to musicals than adults are. That's why so many adults hated Frozen. I think it's for this reason why musical numbers were also so highly contained to the diegetic, strictly this is a performance space, and not so much the spectacular song and dance that we see in Glee, because it's much easier to believe you're just watching someone perform than watching someone perform. And Glee handled this pretty well. For one, the majority of their music were covers. Although the numbers were diegetic, they had the excuse of being centered around a show choir that was performing live performances, which made it much more feasible for the viewer to understand why it was these people were singing. But I'm not saying that Glee's use of musical numbers was identical to that of the earlier decades. For one, the music in Glee means something. Although there's a suspension of disbelief which is attainable through Glee's performances, the show calls you to suspend your disbelief far more with every other aspect of the show. Because the show is so wild from start to finish, you don't even care that you're listening to Kids Bop. The choices of song also reveal something about the characters of the show and play a role in moving the narrative forward. Take, for example, the pilot. Each of the audition songs of the Glee kids says something about their characters. Rachel and Kurt like Broadway. Mercedes wants to be perceived as a diva. Finn likes 80s music because he's using it as a substitute for a father figure. Mr. Shu forces them to perform music that someone who was in a show choir 30 years ago would ask someone to perform. I'm not saying that every musical choice that Glee over the course of its 6 seasons follows this logic, but its general adherence to this logic makes the show more feasible and successful. They're giving some narrative value to the music.
Glee.
So then what did this lead to? A bunch of shows which tried to be Glee. There's currently one show on the air called Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. It's airing, it just wrapped up its first season on NBC. I'm excited to see where it goes. The premise of the show is that the main character, Zoe, goes through this MRI machine which malfunctions and gives her the ability to read people's minds through musical numbers. The cast is star-speckled, so it's fun to watch the people that you know from other things perform these songs, but also perform as their characters. Hey look, it's the mom from Gilmore Girls singing TikTok. To a degree, it's quite literally metadiegetic music. Zoe's the only one that's understanding the music that's going on, but other characters are made aware of it, and it does have an effect on the world of the show, so in that way it's a little dark. I don't know, it's complicated. I'm interested to see how they explore it in hopefully a second season. So what can we learn from this? I don't know. Music, and especially in the spectacular sense, so often regarded as this completely other thing that we constantly try to rationalize its existence. For me though, I think that musical television is this fun world which blends fantasy and reality so bizarrely in so many different ways and is an excellent form of escapism. Especially in quarantine. I'm noticing a lot of people are watching Glee in quarantine, and I'm one of them. Thank you guys so much for watching my video, and stick around for more content coming soon. I got up out of bed at 1 in the morning to film this. Quarantine, am I right?